Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground QA podcast, a podcast about quality assurance in the video games industry. My name is Chris Rando. I'm a QA lead at Epic Games, and my pronouns are he, him. And we have three esteemed QA professionals joining us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Myron, the Director of Quality at Rango.io, and my pronouns are he, him.
My name is Chelsea Curran-Adams. I'm the QA manager at Riot Games, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Thacker. I'm a program manager at Riot Games, and my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see everyone on this beautiful morning. So today, we're going to talk about onboarding. We're going to discuss onboarding and strategies for successfully integrating new team members into an organization. And later on, we'll be opening up to a discussion with you, our viewers and our listeners, for any questions you may have about our discussion. And we're thrilled to have a special guest today. So Lindsay Thacker, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
As she said, a program manager at Riot Games and onboarding aficionado, DM. She's here.
That is my professional title.
Slap that on the LinkedIn. She's here to share and discuss what she has found to be tenets of successful onboarding process. So welcome, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So I want to start off before we get real too deep into this. Let's do our lightning round. Now I want to hear if any of you have had an onboarding horror story. Just kind of like, it doesn't have to be like the worst thing, but you're there on your first day at your new position. You did the interview, you were hired, you accepted, everything's great. And you're there your first day, but the onboarding process was subpar.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Friends ready.
I'm ready for this one. So I was at an agile startup, like over a decade ago. So agile, the air quotes are like real air quotes.
So the air quotes are for agile, not for startup.
Right, yeah. And so I start, and some of the people who were like running things were from like this ThoughtWorks company, and since over a decade ago, they've gone to write amazing like works and like books on micro architectures and services and things of that nature. But back then, some thought that it was more like a cult. Anyway,
Wow.
I joined this organization. Onboarding was like, yo, we do 1 week sprints. Here's the app, kind of. Good luck. Just good luck. And so, I did what anyone in that situation would do. I would start doing boundary testing, finding bugs, adding value in air quotes also. And so Tuesday morning after stand up, I was like, yo, so like, here's all these bugs. And the producer was like, yeah, I don't give a shit about these bugs, man. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, no one's going to use that shit for that. So figure out a way to add value. And
Wow.
that's onboarding. I'll get to the short story. Long story short, 5 months later, I quit for irreconcilable. What is it? Irreconcilable
Differences.
Yep.
Creative differences, maybe, too.
Well, you have to give a reason. I was like, irreconcilable differences. And I did that specifically because the gentleman had just got divorced, and I wanted to have the last word. I know that's kind of
Savage.
kind of savage, but
I feel burned even being involved.
Got him.
That was a horrible onboarding.
Wow.
I actually failed my conducting class because of that job also. Like actually with the baton, it's a little far away, but I actually have a conductor's baton.
Oh,
Like an orchestra or like a choir?
Yes. Wait, actually,
Yeah.
I have to grab this because it's on video.
No, this is real.
I don't have my clarinet with me.
I have an incredible cherry wood case.
Whoa.
Oh my God, is there a Harry Potter wand in there?
Batons.
Oh Oh, that's
That
like
is
legit.
crazy.
He's a wizard. You're a wizard, Myron.
Shoot, dude.
Has anyone ever used a Harry Potter wizard for conducting a symphony orchestra?
Sorry, what'd you
Is my
say?
question. Has anyone ever used a licensed Harry Potter wand for conducting a symphony orchestra? Is my question. And are they better at it because they found the right wand for them?
Oh my goodness. I hope
It's
know
not
what?
too late to change the theme of this podcast. We can forego onboarding.
You know what? I don't know. Have you ever heard of this game? This game called Magic Quest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when I graduated with my master's degree, it wasn't Harry Potter, but someone when they called their name, because you get like a little more spotlight for grad school.
Okay.
They held out their Magic Quest wand and like the tip like glows. Anyway, long divergence, but yes.
That's
So,
amazing.
That's
so for
awesome.
folks who haven't been to Magic Quest is an interactive fantasy land, very similar to some of the stuff that they do at Harry Potter World, but way cooler because it's like a real life RPG. You're going around a building and waving your wand and utilizing spells to interact with the environment around you. And it's really cool, and it's less expensive than Universal.
What?
Myrtle Beach represent.
Yeah.
Noted.
I mean, you can also wave your wand to complete your master's degree. So there's another purpose. But yeah, so that was my onboarding story that went to something like really cool.
That's amazing.
That is truly horrific.
That is
was
yes.
horrible
All of
at
that was
the time.
amazing.
I lost sleep on that. I actually quit that job while my wife was in Germany, and that call was interesting.
Oh man. Well, I
Yeah,
would love
the
to be a
story
fly
is
on that
horrible.
wall.
Horrible.
Well, I mean, I feel like I can't trump that story at all, but I was kind of led into a job and walked to a desk and told like this was my desk, and to talk to the people around me to kind of figure out what was going on. They would give me more later, but the desk, the chair, the keyboard, the mouse, none had been cleaned at all since the previous person had sat in it. And so it was like dusty, and we all know what the majority of dust is. And it was splotchy and sticky.
Come on.
A
and
true horror, like actual.
Oh my
Someone
God.
was maybe murdered there.
and
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
no.
I'm a quasi hypochondriac. The older I've gotten, the less intense it is. But when I was younger, that was a real thing for me. Like, and I went to IT directly and was like, "Can I do something about this?" Because I just couldn't. And I traded my chair out. I tried to.
It's like, oh yeah. If you're thinking about like if that's what the keyboard is, like what's the chair?
So tip number one for me is please make your space for your new folks inviting and clean. If you can still see the like warm impressions of the body who was in your chair before you, it's not a thing, y'all.
That foam's got some memory. My goodness.
So, cleanliness is not covered in my 6 pillars of impactful onboarding because that is literally the bare minimum.
Yeah. Maslow's hierarchy of hiring. Just clean.
Clean.
Oh, amazing.
It's nothing like, I mean, there's nothing like literally feeling like a surprise and feeling also like you're replacing a body on the front lines.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Like, hey, just
Yeah,
shove this
intense.
guy over. You're in the trenches now.
Oh my goodness. These are just amazing. Mine was more of I was hired and the company knew I was coming, but I think they did know, but they were also a startup. So, this kind of might go into a similar theme with Myron here, but they did know I was coming, but kind of just sat me down and said, here you go. And they really didn't know what to do with me. I was coming in as a lead, and I don't think any of them had really worked with the QA lead before and weren't really sure what I was supposed to be doing. And they didn't like walk me really through a lot of, here's the product that we're working on. Here's the stuff you're going to need to understand how our product works and why we need it and why it's good. Here, like a lot of it had to come from me orchestrating myself. Like the first day was me sitting at a desk pretty alone, not knowing what's going on, trying to dig through a wiki. And we all know that wikis can be,
totally
just
up to date and correct and easy to use.
Of course, that would be great, especially at a startup. So it's good. So it's like not nearly as incredible as having the last word, or as cringeworthy as having a keyboard covered in dust, air quotes. But man, it was an unpleasant experience to just sit there my first full day, kind of alone, everyone else banging away doing their things, and have nowhere to go, nothing. Like luckily I could go and talk to the other QA heads on the team, like, hey, help me through this. Oh yeah, sure. Oh, we don't have this document, but I can sit you through this. So I was able to kind of stumble through it myself, but they didn't have anything for, here's a new person, we need to teach you how this company works. And it's lonely.
Yes, isolating
so
for
lonely.
sure. Isolating.
Lindsay, have you got a good one?
Yes, my story is less overtly horrific and more subtle, so it's more like a psychological thriller, I feel like, of onboarding, rather than a horror story. Because it was my first job in the game industry, and my manager, actually, like now historically, 7 years later, he is one of the best managers I've ever had. But when I joined the company, I had just gotten out of college, and I was like super ultra hyped. I was like, oh my God, the games, and I'll be making them. I'm freaking out.
Here you are.
I'm like, I somehow tricked these people into hiring me as a QA person. I'm like, I don't really know what to do. I didn't know, because there's no like academia around QA, as like we all know that, right? So I didn't know what a good bug looked like, and I didn't know how to file one, and I didn't know how to assign that to the right person. I didn't know what repro steps were. I didn't know anything, and so I got a nice opening to my onboarding because the company knew I was coming. I had a clean desk, and I had new like hardware and stuff, and that was really nice. My manager gave me a tour and introduced me to the rest of the QA group, because we weren't embedded. We were a whole central QA group at that company. And then I sat down at my desk, and he like rolled over in his chair. I remember every time he would do this, he would roll over up next to me, and he would just be like, all right, go ahead and jump into the game and get started. Let's see if like your stuff works or whatever. And so like slowly over time, we were figuring out, like, I didn't know how to use Perforce. How do I get into Perforce? How do I download this stuff? How do I log into the game with a dev account? How do I use dev commands? What are dev commands? Like, and then I asked him, like, okay, so what do I do? And he's like, oh, just like for your first few days, you're just going to run around, and like, if you find stuff, that's great. And then you can like log a bug. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that though. So he taught me, like we had to slowly figure out together, because he was new to management. I didn't know that until later. He had just been converted to a manager very recently. So he had been poorly onboarded as a manager, probably. And he didn't have clear expectations for me, except for to figure them out over time. And I was totally lucky, because he was just a naturally good manager. He was a good people person, I guess. He already had the soft skills. So he didn't make me feel like I was going to lose my job or anything, because that would be very intimidating for a new person right out of college, not knowing what they're doing or how to like accomplish a goal or or have expectations. And he was like, oh, you don't know how to file a bug? Well, go to this website, because we were on a web-based bug database, which was really interesting. And then here's how you file a bug. And that's he like slowly taught me over time, but we had to figure out what I needed to know very slowly. So it was very scary for me, which is why I call this a psychological thriller, because I constantly thought I was going to get fired, because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Why was I hired? So that was terrifying for the first like month or so. And then, we were launching a game, so I got to learn incredibly quickly. And
You
that
were brought
was,
in at that time.
yes, it was great. It was great. I got to do overtime right off the bat,
Oh, yay.
which was great for someone who just got out of college. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Super, super into overtime. But yeah, that's my story.
Well, it was
so
definitely a thriller.
It's so anxiety inducing when you are not onboarded well, and you're like the thing as you just said, Lindsay. I don't know if I was about to be fired.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like coming into work and going home every night with that on your chest.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
Yeah, I think my scariest moment was in my first week. It may have been the first day. One of the expectations he set up for me was, come and ask me any questions that you have. And I don't know what questions to ask, right?
Yeah,
So
you don't know what you don't know.
Literally my only expectation set as a person with a job was, come ask me questions. And I'm like, I don't have any questions because I don't know what to ask.
no.
And I was too scared to say that, right? So he rolled over at one point at the end of the day and he was like, so I noticed you haven't asked any questions. And I was like, oh my God, I'm being fired on my first day.
Like, that was quick.
Fortunately, he was like I said, he was a very good manager. He was being supportive, and he figured I hadn't asked questions because I didn't know a whole bunch of shit.
Because you didn't know what you were doing.
Right, exactly, yeah.
That's so sad.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, I lucked out. If that was another person put in the same situation he was, who had a lower tolerance or understanding for someone going through that would have been a very negative, very bad experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, so in order to, so we've all experienced some subpar onboarding, some more so than others. So let's talk about what it'd be like to have, like, good onboarding process. What does that feel like? What does that look like? How can that help the team and the person grow? I'm really excited about this. Lindsay, if you don't mind, could you give us like a TLDR about how you became such a champion for onboarding?
Because we're so bad at it as an industry. It would be the shortest. So here's how I started. This is very strange. So my first job in QA was a contract job. So at the end of that contract, I had to leave the company for 3 months.
Yeah.
That lined up really well with summer. So I got to be a camp counselor / game design instructor at a tech camp, a summer camp called ID Tech Camps.
Nice.
And I thought it was a good way to fill that 3-month gap and get kind of paid and still able to do some like game stuff. So I taught middle schoolers the like basics and foundational ideas around game design through Minecraft. So all of us created our own like adventure games each week was the idea. And so when I came back at the end of that contract, there was like a running joke that was like, well, Lindsay, you taught kids. Why don't you teach everyone how to do QA? And I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's not too far from like reality, right? Teaching children and adults can be very similar. So it was kind of a joke, but I really enjoyed teaching those kids, and I've always liked teaching people anyway, and I've loved learning. So when I got the opportunity to like revamp our onboarding program for QA for the whole company, I definitely jumped on it. So we had a bunch of old materials, old slide decks, documentation, all that fun stuff. And what I did was I took on the discipline level onboarding, and it was for Guild Wars 2 at ArenaNet, and we only had Guild Wars 2. So I taught people. I was like one of the first people that someone would come across. It would be like their manager and me, who they'd be talking to the most when they started, if they started in QA. And I would teach them everything about Guild Wars 2 and like how to test it, what the main components of the game are, and what a good bug looks like for Guild Wars 2. So I created that program. And we started getting a few new people, and I would teach a few new QA people these things. And then we actually started throwing new producers and a few game designers into the program as well. So they would be pseudo QA people for the first 2 weeks that they were at our company. And they would learn how to file a bug, what a good bug looks like. They would be treated like, hey, you're a QA person and this is our process. And then they would go off to their department. Now live game. So the reality was that I would get them for as long as the emergencies on live would allow, right? So sometimes I would get that person for a full 2 weeks. Sometimes they would have their desk there for 2 weeks, but they would bounce back and forth between QA onboarding and like production or game design onboarding. So it was a really cool experiment that I really appreciated, like our leaders sort of pushing with the rest of the company, and that was really cool. So that was my first experience with really creating an onboarding program and seeing how that could benefit a group of people. I also ended up using that program for onboarding our whole group of like testing partners, and we had a group of testing partners in not only in the US, but they were actually like a 15-minute drive away from our office. So I spent a lot of time there when we were spinning that group up, doing that whole onboarding program for actual classrooms full of testers. So that was like 12 to 15 people per group. And I think I did 2 or 3 groups before they were starting to able to train each other when someone would show up.
That's super cool.
So that was pretty fun. I made people like have their computers in the classroom so we could run through and do like environment art bugs together. And like we had a whole like environment art, basically like scavenger hunt, essentially, where we had a really gross map full of bugs. And we just figured out like, hey, we had a certain number of pry 1 through 4 or 5 or whatever our priorities were. And we would just see who could catch like the most diverse number of bugs and all of that fun stuff. And we would talk about like, how would you file this bug? And this is what it would look like if you were to file it and all that stuff. So that was like the biggest, I think one of the bigger programs. And that turned into every other job being, so you do onboarding though. And that was it. So that was actually one of the hardest programs to create because I had a lot of material to work with, but it was all old. And I just happened to be someone who tested the crap out of that game a month before it launched. So I ended up, I knew a lot of things about it and I had some good material and I was able to like force that into a program. And then every like job after that was just like, oh, I see you have this on your resume. Do you want to do something like that here? And I was like, yes, I do. That's amazing. Because at every place there was no onboarding. So it was constant. I've been at 4 or 5 studios and there's always like nothing. I think Riot had the most comprehensive onboarding program on my arrival, both at a company level and at a QA level. And I was like, cool. How do I like level this up?
Like, okay, good. Here's something. Okay.
I got this.
You got to grab one.
Yeah, I know exactly. Sorry, that was kind of like a long-winded answer, I guess. You said TLDR and I did not.
Yes.
Everyone had to read that.
Totally read it, but it was good. It was a good read. It was gripping. Another psychological thriller, and thank you.
So many thrills in QA.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you, Lindsay. So I'm going to let you drive for a bit and let us kind of poke at you and discuss some of your pillars. So please introduce us to your pillars of onboarding.
Yes. Should I share my screen or just talk about them? What do you all feel like is a...
I think you should share it initially and then you can move out of it if you want to. But I think
absolutely.
For those of you who can watch on the stream or whatever visual way of consuming our podcast, Lindsay's going to share. For those of you who are just consuming via audio, we'll try and be as descriptive as possible about Lindsay's beautiful slide that she's got here.
Oh yeah, very excited. Let me go back. Look, I even have an opening slide. This is so professional.
Myron, do we have an input for her?
Yeah, you should be able to add your screen share.
It says I'm sharing it now.
Yeah, it's on Light Studio, but it is not in our Twitch overlay.
Oh, I see.
Let's see. Let me see if I can find it.
Apologies for the technical difficulties, but this is good because I'm going to be sharing my screen in a little bit too, probably. So
I think it's so appropriate that this is a QA podcast, though, right? We can get away with all kinds of testing technology live, right?
Yeah,
live. Love it.
We're very good at finding bugs.
We test in production here.
Yeah, a practice I'm sure we all promote.
So I don't see your screen share. Do you see it in the green room?
I do.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, why don't I see it in the green room? Because I'm not looking at the green room.
Hey.
That will do it.
Very good. Fixed.
Yes. Fixed. All right. So I'm gonna change the scene to only.
Oh, they can't hear anyone now. Hi, I'm loud. Wow. Oh, this is going to be fun. Oh, this is a great activity to do with the team. Make ridiculous presentations and make other people present them for you. I just came up with a great quarantine activity. Oh, yeah, we're totally doing this now. Yeah, totally. I'm just gonna put some emojis here in the Twitch chat because I feel like this is what we have to do. Lindsay, I am going to put my graphic in the show doc so that we can just share from your screen so we don't have to go through this again. There we go. Sarah, can you hear all of us? It's my show right now. Well, I did. Uh, let's see. What stories can I tell you that are interesting? I don't know if y'all have read or listened to Tales of Beetle the Bard, but J.K. Rowling came out with the Audible edition very recently. And if you were into the Harry Potter universe, I highly recommend it. And the reason why is because you get to hear all of the stories that they reference throughout the Harry Potter books. But you also get to hear them in character voice. So they got pretty famous actors and Dumbledore have notes along the way. And so you hear the story and then you hear Dumbledore's notes and Hermione's notes on the story throughout it. And if you're, like I said, if you're big into Harry Potter, it's amazing because it expands the universe. If Harry Potter's not your thing and you just like fairy tales, I think it's really good. And if you have kids, if you skip the Dumbledore parts and you just do the stories themselves, they're actually really great fairy tales. It's a quick listen. About 2 hours. Lindsay, do you want to check your audio really quickly?
Yes.
Yay.
Okay.
Hello.
So we've got Chris and me.
And me too.
We need a Twitch chat report on the audio situation. We're good now.
Yay!
We're
Thank
good
you.
now.
Thank you for playtesting. Playtesting is valuable. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Twitch stream viewers. We love you, especially Sarah.
Okay, shall I roll on ahead?
Yes, go for it.
I love how weird this is. Well, we love it too.
I think we just got complimented. That's all right.
I think so. I'm
That's
into
my
it.
interpretation.
Keeping it weird since 2020. Let's go.
That's another good thing to learn about QA. If you're not ready for weird, you're not ready for QA. All right. So should I just jump in and start rambling?
Oh yeah.
Because this is, or I guess ranting might be more of a.
Can we reduce the R words? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh. I don't. So the presentation is taking up the whole screen. I can't see anyone's face, and I was like, "Oh my god, am I getting fired on my first day?" It was like a horror story.
Now, if you have the green room open on another screen, if you have multiple screens, you can see us.
Yeah, but I only have the one screen.
Okay,
Don't do it.
Because I'm
you would have seen me.
We've established I'm a very professional person, right?
Can we ask Don to upgrade his hardware? I know you're watching, Don.
Oh, this is my hardware. This is my hardware. He has an incredibly
upgrade your hardware.
Well, you have to ask Riot Games to do it. He actually has a really nice setup, and I probably could have like commandeered that for the morning, but I didn't think about it until it was too late. So we're rolling with this. We're rolling with my super #professional.
Here it is.
This isn't 6 pillars of impactful being a professional, people. It's how to onboard. We're in the trenches here. This is the real stuff. Okay. Here we go. Fewer our words, and we'll just talk about onboarding. All right. So if anyone saw the social media stuff, these are the 6 pillars. Spoiler alert. That's it. We're done. It's just expectations, documentation, networking, mentorship, and initial project, and follow up and follow through, which if you're a really observant person, follow up and follow through is actually 2 pillars. So we get an extra pillar for the price of 6 pillars. Very exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into each pillar and walk through 2 major things. I'm going to walk through like high level what good looks like, and then I'll also talk about like what can you actually do here. So there's some basic like ideas of how to do this well, and then some more specific examples a little bit as we go through these. So let's start with expectations. So what good looks like here for expectations is that your onboarding has them. Setting expectations with someone is really important. And how this looks is that it's done early, often, it's specific, it's reassuring, and it's not that person's job description. So early, often, and specific is really kind of very heavily on the manager at the beginning, where you're having one-on-ones, you're talking to that person, your new hire, and telling them exactly what you expect of them in their role. And that's where reassuring and not a job description become an important part of the discussion. Like these expectations should reassure the person that they'll kind of know what they're doing, or at the very least they'll know what they're trying to do, and that's how they can generate those questions for you. So like with my onboarding horror story earlier, I didn't know what was expected of me besides that I was supposed to ask questions, and I didn't know what questions to ask. So I thought I was failing at my job immediately, right? So having that proper expectation setting done really early, often, specific, and reassuring, and making sure that it's not just the job description they read online is really important. The job description component I like to highlight because a lot of people, like a lot of hiring managers, might think, oh, well, I put all this work into this job description, and we hired this person based on this job description, and so these are just their expectations, right? But in reality, when someone joins a team, it's probably several months after that job description was written, and it may not be relevant to their specific role anymore. So that's why I like to highlight not using the job description, like just handing them the job description as a list of expectations. If it turns out that the way you wrote the job description is a set of expectations and it's relevant for the role, then you can definitely use that in your documentation, which is the next pillar. Right? Yeah, here we go. So professional.
This is where my salt mines are.
Yeah. All of these I think are foundational pillars that they may feel obvious. If you're a hiring manager and you've been doing onboarding for a long time, like these things might feel obvious to you. Mm-hmm. And for some people it might feel obvious and highlight that they're not doing them. And I think that component is really important as well. So like things like expectations and like handing someone documentation or like mentoring them, that we all think that these things are maybe fairly simple, but the reality is a lot of people don't experience them, as we observed earlier with our horror stories, right? Thank you for setting that up for me, everybody. By the way, definitely like using that. Gonna leverage that throughout the whole discussion. So what does good look like here for documentation? It's not just similar to like handing someone a job description for their expectations. It's not just a bunch of papers or digital papers that you just throw at somebody. It should be accessible, updated regularly, and foundational. So what these things mean is that this documentation you hand someone, it should be easy for them to find or access when they first start. So if it's just one comprehensive document where they're going to receive links from other documents by reading that single document, that's a good way to make things accessible. And you can just send that person one link, and they can have that with them throughout their whole onboarding and even reference it when they've been around for a while. The fact that documentation is updated regularly is pretty important. I think there's a pretty clear running gag with anyone ever being onboarded ever that they're handed a bunch of outdated documentation. So it's something we've all experienced. And the main thing I hear around this is that it's very difficult to update documentation regularly for new hires. And especially in QA, this can be hard if we're hiring a lot of people all at once. A few solutions I've seen done here that have worked are that if you have the bandwidth and the ability to set this goal for your new hire, you can actually be very honest with them and say, hey, I'm going to hand you some relevant documentation that might be out of date. So what I'm going to do is set a new expectation with you, going back to pillar 1, and say like, hey, I'm just giving you our reality. Maybe everything's on fire. Maybe we're launching our live game in a month. That's an MMO, and it's terrifying. Totally. And just being honest with them about like, hey, here's your documentation. It might be outdated. I want you to work with me. And for me to help you update this documentation. And that's going to be part of your onboarding. Now that can be very tricky. It can be very difficult to do that well. Right. And it could be very easy for you to just say like, hey, here's your documentation. It's out of date. You have to update it and then walk away. That would be the not ideal scenario.
Pro tip right there.
So you're saying that when I did that last week, Patrick, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Patrick, no, that's totally fine, Chelsea. I mean, there are realities around documentation, right? It is a hard thing. There's a reason people don't update it very often. It's difficult to do. There can be a lot of disparate pieces that have to come together. But even setting that expectation and being honest with your new hire and saying, hey, these are out of date, and part of your onboarding is going to be updating these. That will just set them up to think like, okay, I know that some of this stuff might not make sense, or I may run into some issues if it's a piece of documentation for like a tool. Maybe that tool has been updated and all the pop-ups are weird and the text fields are different. And that you can set the expectation with your new hire and say like, hey, try to utilize this documentation as a prompt for you to ask me questions. And there are no wrong questions. I know this is out of date. We both know it's out of date. This is not on you. It is an opportunity for us to just get our documentation up to date and onboard you at the same time. So that I think you can make that a really positive experience for someone. It's just that you also have to be a good people manager at the same time. So I guess that's, was someone going to say something?
Yeah, I was actually, go for it, Myron. Yeah.
Framing is so important. And I would also add timing. If it's the first thing on the first day, you just drop the documentation and bounce, probably not cool. After your first one-on-one, after you've like taken them to lunch or like gotten to know them, understand their style a little bit and like use that to frame that conversation. Win.
Yeah, I think for me, so what just to go in depth, for me, the links at our company tend to change. We're in a little bit of a flux. Like, are we placing things in Confluence? Are we placing them on our direct internal intranet page? Like, what are we doing? And so there is not enough time in the day for anyone to update links in documentation for stuff. And so I think like it's really important to have that framing. It's also uniquely a way for them to explore internal tools. And so I think it's kind of a cool way for them to maybe get familiar with stuff if it's just links. Now, if it's steps, that's a different thing, right? Like if you're like, hey, all of our test cases are out of date, rewrite them all. See you later.
That's scary.
Which I actually have had that happen to me. If we want to talk about horror stories, it's literally a thing. Or like, hey, our automation isn't working. It's kind of busted here. Can you debug this?
Oh, that's not that's interesting. Yeah, I think those are all really good additions that you all have about documentation. It is a difficult thing. And I actually, as part of our company onboarding, I do the presentation for QA, where I introduce new people at Riot to like how QA works at our company. And one of the things that I bring up with them is also documentation around design or like systems or technology. And the joke that I have with that group every time is, so documentation, it seems pretty simple, but we all know how difficult that is. So like this is definitely a pillar that is, it's so interesting how dichotomous it is, right? It's so important, I think, to have things that people can reference so that they can self-pace and self-learn. But we also have to give them the reality, which is that sometimes these things are out of date. And here's why, and here's how we're going to work together to make them not that way. And Chelsea, it sounds like you told Patrick at least like, hey, some of these links might not work, or this documentation might be out of date. And that I think is like, that's awesome. That is a great way to approach the scenario, because I think what feels bad, and the reason I highlight as I highlight updated regularly as a like what good looks like here. Right. Is that like people will drop documentation like you drop a person at a desk and walk away. And then this new hire is clicking through things that are broken, or they try to go through a step-by-step guide for Perforce that's like 2 versions older or something like that. And they just don't know what they're doing. And none of the documents help them. They actually hinder them and make it harder. And they might, and if they don't know that those documents are out of date, they might think they're doing something wrong in the end, which is an even worse scenario, right? Like maybe they don't have expectations set for them, and they haven't had the reality set for these pieces of documents. And they're going through and they're like, the thing I'm doing in the document isn't working. And I think that's me because I'm new, I have something to prove, and I have imposter syndrome. And that's just not fun. So like documentation, it feels like a small thing or something where we're all like, this is obviously going to go out of date, or documentation is hard. But if we don't at the very least set the reality for our new hires, it can actually be really damaging. So it's pretty shocking how that kind of simple scenario of documentation can turn into something so sinister for a new hire. And apparently I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about documentation, but it's definitely a good thing to highlight. To quickly go over actual examples, like things you could walk away with and do right now. We briefly talked about this, but like a single personalized document is awesome. So Chelsea, you highlighted for you new hire Patrick, some of that documentation for him might be out of date, but I know, because I know you and I've seen it in reality, you've created a personalized document for him. And so what that can look like is it can have like a whole month laid out for someone where it highlights, hey, on this day of this week, go have a one-on-one with this person. Or
do you want to show it?
Attend this class. Yeah, let's look at it right now. Let's do this. So I'm sharing. Oh man, ooh. I feel like an old person. It works. I can see that on the thing.
Checking the Google.
So I just have the document open.
Scroll all the way down.
Okay, here we go.
There it is.
So this is Chelsea's, this is the first page of your document, right, Chelsea?
Yeah, that's the very first thing that they see.
So this is awesome. So Chelsea has called out her team's name, QA onboarding. This is your start date. This may seem so simple, but having your team name correct and the start date is a big win. This really makes someone feel just a bit more comfortable, you know? But like what's really the highlight of this part of the documentation is this first month. Or first 4 weeks, right? So Chelsea even said your first day, ! I'm excited you're here. That's this is all very good stuff. And she I feel like if I was Chelsea's new hire, let's say the rest of the document is totally out of date, or Chelsea deleted it because she's like, it's out of date and I don't even want you to deal with it. The fact that she made this little calendar is so awesome. This is a great piece of documentation. Like review this other QA documentation. We're having a QA craft forum, which was amazing, by the way. What is quality assurance? Monthly one-on-ones with these people with real names. Like this is all very helpful, because at the very least, if everyone who is onboarding me disappeared, I would know that on May 6th, I'm going to go to the QA craft forum and I'm going to set up some one-on-ones with some specific people. And even if I only did that today, that would feel like an accomplishment. And I know that that's what my hiring manager wants me to do. And that is great. So this is really awesome. So this is one piece of a whole, like, I think, document that Chelsea, you have that goes over a little bit more detail as you scroll through the document. So personalizing this piece is awesome. It can make someone feel like not only do they have some goals that they can achieve, but that they were thought of before they showed up at their desk, right? Which is awesome. And I think that's a very common experience that we've all had, where someone is surprised when we show up for our first day of work. It's either the security guards, which is probably the worst. If nobody, like someone at reception or security doesn't know that you're new or how to handle a new person, that's probably the worst scenario. But if your hiring manager is also not prepared, and it feels like you were dropped on their plate, that also feels pretty bad. If I look at this document, I feel like Chelsea thought about me well before I started. I feel like she's definitely, even if she filled this out the day before I started at Riot, I would know, like, wow, she dedicated a lot of brain time to this and typed a lot of stuff out. And that makes me feel really awesome as a new hire. And I'll know what I'm doing for a little while, which is great. So Chelsea has also done some things here that I like highlighting for what you can do in the documentation space. And this is highlighting team members, right? So she highlights people she should have, this person should have one-on-ones with, and some important rituals that are happening as well. Like on May 22nd, it says first TM4J pass on Lock CMS is complete. That is something that the rest of the team is in on, that I am now in on as a new hire, right? So like that's a really good part of the highlighting team members and rituals and making that person feel like they're a part of that team. Something else that can be a great part of the personalized document is creating checklists. So like if you don't want to make a month-long document, or you don't even know when you'll want someone to do something, giving them a checklist on their first day or a checklist for the whole week or month is a really great way to not only incorporate setting up your expectations with them, but give them some very clear goals to go through as well. And if you're someone who likes timelines, if you want to set up the whole month or multiple months, you can actually do something around theming each week or month. Maybe their first week is all about just making sure that their hardware works and that they can log into software, and that's the theme. And that can be a part of your expectation setting as well, where you can tell them like, hey, this is what your role looks like, but we're going to talk about each week that you're here for the first month. Your first week is just making sure you can log in and maybe file a bug. And you don't even have to file a real bug. You can just make sure that it works. And it's like that can be a great way to make someone feel like they can achieve some things, especially if you need to be pulled away to fight a fire or do something else that hiring managers do in secret, right? So that's all stuff that's very positive. So theming these things, having that personalized document, and highlighting your team members, creating checklists. These are all great ways to participate in the documentation process. So Chelsea, thank you for the example. I'm going to switch back to the presentation thing. So we've spent a lot of time in documentation, which is really great. I don't think anyone would think that we would do that, but
more people need to do that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Chris, it's this is your big
I was just so happy just to hear everything. It's just it's like I could go on about, we could do an entire podcast about documentation, and I could just I'll use the R word, rant, just for literally hour and a half, 2 hours about all the salt that I have about documentation I've bumped into. And I know my documentation isn't perfect, but I try and make it, I try and get it there. I try to prop it up and I try to make it evolve and get better. And I really like a lot of the points that you were making about giving them, if you need to give them outdated documentation, make sure you tell them. Don't just kind of drop a link and be like, hey, bye, and then check in on them a day later and be like, hey, did you read that documentation? Because the person there is like, oh, this seems right, but I'm going to try and use this command line. Oh, but it doesn't work. Is that a bug? And then they're confused and they don't get very far because things are way out of date.
Yeah.
and giving them that caveat, like, hey, this might be out of date. We'll walk through it together. I'll come check in on you on a bit. If you see something that seems wrong, let me know, and we'll work through it, and I'll show you
Yeah.
where something that's
Exactly.
fixed is.
People are
Yeah.
spending
That
time
alone.
troubleshooting that too,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like every time that your documentation is off, people are spending time troubleshooting what's wrong, and they're chasing something down. And there's no quicker way to lose trust with very busy people. Like imagine you're not there to say like, oh, that was just wrong. So then they have to go to a teammate, and the teammate's like, hey, dummy. They're not going to say that, but in their head, they're like, or it's going to reflect on you, right? So there's a chance that you're wasting the team's time, you're reducing trust on the team, and you're reducing your personal capital with whoever has to deal with the fallout of it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Just
one question I had too on the, I'm sorry, Chris, on the
No.
aspect of like, I'm so happy you brought up team, the word team. So say you're listening to this and you're the type of leader who may not like homework that much. Is it okay to leverage your team to create this documentation and keep it updated to make sure that they're also ready to receive their new teammate?
Are you asking me or Chris or
I'm asking
anyone?
everyone.
I would
No,
say
Go ahead,
that
Lindsay.
oh, sorry, Chelsea. I would say that like leveraging the help of your team, especially if that new hire is joining that team, can be a really great part of actually the expectation component as well. Where you're when you set expectations for your new hire, you actually should also be setting those expectations with your whole team so that they know what your new hire is doing and what's expected of them when they show up. And a part of that expectation setting can be, hey, these documents are important for this new hire, and I really need some help updating these, and we're all going to be a part of this onboarding process for this person. I think getting your team involved and having them help you update that is definitely a great way to do it. That also framing becomes a good component of that as well. If you're just dumping the documentation on one person on your team or the whole team and saying like, this new person's starting in like 2 days, can you guys just like update this? It's super out of date. That's not the ideal version of that scenario. I think the ideal version is like, hey, we're a team together. This new person's part of our team, and these things are important for them to help us be better as a team. So I think that you can definitely utilize the expertise around you on your team to update that documentation.
Yeah, I would say I passed along that document that you saw to the product owner of the team, to the other QA person on the team, and to a couple of other folks, including Lindsay, to take a look at it to say, hey, does this look right? Are you invested in this? And then earlier in the process, I also, when I'm crafting it, I'm working with those people too. But I always get a final sign off from folks. On Friday, I just had a conversation. I'm onboarding a kind of new role, and I don't have a ton of context on it. So I messaged the team directly in Slack, and it's like 20 people. And I was like, hey, I need a couple of people to help me with the onboarding docs. Can I get someone to help me? Because I can do the craft part, but I can't do the team part of that. And so my advice is don't be afraid if you don't know everything about the processes. You don't have to be the expert to be the nexus of where the documentation should be happening for onboarding.
Yeah, that's a really good real life highlight, Chelsea. That was a great question as well, Myron.
Yeah.
Is everyone ready to move to the next pillar?
Yes.
It should be 6 pillars of impactful documentation. It's such a shockingly deep subject, right? So the next pillar is networking. And what good looks like in the networking space is, because we're used to seeing the word networking for actually like building your network, usually outside of your job or when you're trying to find a job. But networking at your job is actually also really helpful and important for the onboarding process. So what good looks like here is that the networking for your new hire is a guided, comprehensive, and partially independent experience. So I'm going to reference Chelsea's document because I love it. Chelsea highlighted when her new hire should set up one-on-ones with folks, right? And who those people are. And that I would say that is some really great guided and somewhat independent networking. It's you're telling your new hire like, hey, these are the folks that you should be meeting with either regularly or in this one-on-one, and you should schedule these one-on-ones with them on this day or around this time. And that is really good because you're still empowering the new hire to set up that time on their own and make that time work for them and the person that they're meeting. And Chelsea is guiding her new hire by telling them who those people are. Another highlight I want to make with networking and what good looks like here is actually kind of customizing this experience depending on your new hire. So if you have the ability to talk to your new hire a bit on their first day and say, hey, I want you to meet some people on the team. I know who you should have regular one-on-ones with. I know who I want you to meet maybe just in your first couple of weeks, but you don't have to have regular one-on-ones. Asking them what would make them feel comfortable about the guided part of that process can be really important. As a new hire, you might be wanting to read a bunch of documentation, making sure your hardware is set up. And if they're working from home, that's another added stress. So talking to them about whether they want you as the hiring manager to set up these one-on-ones or whether they want to set them up can be a pretty powerful moment in their onboarding as well. Some new hires might really want to tackle that on their own and say, oh, I want to introduce myself to these people and I want to be the one who is pulling the lever on when these one-on-ones happen. Another completely other totally valid experience for a new hire is I'm terrified of reaching out to new people at this giant company. And I'm really excited to be here, but I'm also nervous. And going through that process in a little bit more of a like more guided way as the hiring manager, where you're setting up the one-on-ones, or even if you're just doing introductions via Slack or whatever your instant messaging services that you use at your company. That is also a great way to just help the new hire get over that hurdle of maybe feeling nervous about introducing themselves to someone. Yeah. So that's what I recommend in the networking space for just a general, like, hey, this is what good looks like. And as far as like specifically what you can do, I know we already kind of got into this with like customizing it per new hire. But what this looks like, and Chelsea's document is a good example, is like, this is one-on-ones with team members is a very specific way to just get people to network within the team. Having a social event with your whole team or core people on your team that the new hire should know is also a really great part of networking as an onboarding component. Because if you have a moment where all of you are having lunch together or playing a game together or just having like an hour outside of the stress of work or addressing a live issue or someone being onboarded, and you're all taking a moment to just go inside your own bubble as a team and be social together. And that's a really great space for the new hire to build some trust and build rapport with the team around them. And that's also a really great part of their onboarding, because they'll start to feel more comfortable just as a human being, right? Like understanding how to do their job and understanding what's expected of them and the goals they need and the software they need to do. This is all important stuff of them doing the work, but they're also a person on a team of people and they need to feel comfortable there. So that's why I always recommend some kind of social event within the first few weeks of somebody joining a team. And then other things that you can do are very specifically, invite them to your team meetings. That may seem really obvious, but boy, can that not happen. If you have regular daily stand-ups, retrospectives, if you have planning, if you have any kind of team ritual or meeting that happens regularly, make sure they're on those invites either when they start or on like the first day, because it's nothing feels worse than everyone in the room standing up to go somewhere and you're sitting at your desk by yourself and you're like, where is everyone going? Are they going to fire me? That's where you're going.
You're leaving me here to be fired.
You're leaving you here to be fired. Or we're going into the team
number 76 in my first week why I thought I was going to get fired.
Exactly. There you go. So that's that is another example of something with onboarding that feels obvious, and it feels like it's something like everyone should be doing that, right? I do that, right? Do I? Definitely think about it and make it a part of your process when a new hire shows up, that they are invited to those team meetings. And then something else I like to highlight here that's a little more specific in the networking space is actually thinking beyond your team as well. Who is someone on a team adjacent to yours that may be important for your new hire to know? Who is someone on a completely different team working on a completely different product but doing a similar role or job that person might benefit from knowing, right? That's, I think, highlighting people outside the team is also a great way for your new hire to get some experience with what the culture of your company is like, as well as understanding like who are some other people I should be talking to in my day-to-day work.
Yay, QA ally.
Exactly. The primary example of this that I really like is the QA Ally program that we have at Riot, which was definitely 1,000% inspired by how Chelsea approaches onboarding. Good job, Chelsea. You're such a good onboarding person. And what the way that program works is a new hire shows up. They are given all of their like team onboarding through their hiring manager, and then I handle a lot of the general onboarding stuff. So we have a few like classes that people can take. Oh, stop! But do go on, Chelsea. So I handle the general stuff. So there are a few classes we might sign people up for, but one core component of our program is QA Ally, where the hiring manager and I work together to pick a one single QA person on a different team and product and even initiative. If we can get them almost as far apart as being at separate companies, that's what we want to do. And the idea is that they're working in a similar role or doing similar work to the new hire, but they have no connection to the work that they're doing. And this is a really great way to build connections across embedded teams, because as we may have all experienced, having embedded teams at a company is really beneficial, but it can make the discipline feel more dispersed and more difficult to connect with. It's an opportunity for that veteran employee to give some advice and mentor somebody. It can be a leadership opportunity for them. And it's an opportunity for them to learn from the new hire as well. That person, like the new hire is obviously a person of a certain level of experience that you think is appropriate for their job. So they could actually end up teaching you and teaching their QA ally. So we actually set them up with 4 one-on-ones across 4 weeks so that they at least have 4 30-minute meetings together, where we just tell them that the expectation for those meetings is that the veteran rioter and the new rioter get to know each other. They provide the veteran provides like a supportive ear and someone to talk to about like company culture, or if something feels weird on their team, it's just a good ear to have that's not directly tied to your work, right? So like that person isn't your hiring manager. They can't affect your compensation. They can't give you a performance review. They can just help you kind of get through the first few weeks of being at a new company while also teaching you a few new things as well from the perspective of a different product. So I think that's a really good example of a networking program that works within our onboarding program at Riot that I really like. And it's actually, I think, one of our highest rated parts of the general QA onboarding. I'm pretty sure it's like every time what I do is like 2 or 3 months after someone starts, I'll usually sit down with them and be like, hello, welcome to the one-on-one where you give me feedback about your onboarding experience. And like 9 times out of 10, we're having good discussions about some classes and other things going on. And then they're like, oh yeah, QA ally. Oh man, I love my put in QA ally name here. That person's great. I still talk to them. Like it's such a low overhead part of the program to handle for me and the new or the hiring manager. It's just, hey, who do we pick that we know? All right, we got someone. They said they have the time. They've committed. We put that on their calendar, and then we don't really have to do anything as long as we set up the proper expectations with them.
So easy.
Super easy. It's a really, really great way for that new hire to feel supported. And sometimes that new hire ends up getting way more support than they thought they would get from just one person that they were set up with.
Interestingly, it's also gotten people to move in their career too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like people have chosen paths. Like there are specific folks that I can think of that have chosen career paths because of their QA ally.
Wow. That's awesome. I didn't know that. Yeah, yep. QA ally, good stuff.
So heartwarming and nice.
Yeah, so highly recommend adding that to your onboarding process, especially because it is so low impact from the hiring manager perspective or the onboarding manager perspective. It's just it's shocking. I spent more time writing the document that sets expectations for the ally and the new hire than I do actually doing the upkeep for that program. It's very simple. So
also just a note, it's a really amazing way to get people who are looking for more leadership opportunities and mentorship opportunities, a very low impact way of doing that. And so because it can be someone of the same level and it should be someone of a very similar level. So we have a situation where entry level folks don't necessarily know how they can impact or mentor because they're like, I don't know anything. And you're like, no, actually, you know a lot. And we're going to tap that knowledge base. It gives them more connections. It gives them the ways to expand their knowledge. And it gives us a way to give them the opportunity to give leadership to them. And so it's a very great way when you have a large organization or a small organization to give folks the opportunity to have official mentorship, to have official ways to improve their careers. And it's a great way to get people involved in owning their craft and owning their discipline without having hours of work to do.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing like in your 4th month after you've done your 90-day or whatever that looks like, getting to show that you got good at something. Like right away, just like, man, I got good. I know where you're at, and I actually have something I can provide. Like I'm a part of the team. Like they trusted me with. There's so much you can get from that. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing. That's really, really great to underscore.
Awesome. Oh, this is great. I also just want to, I know this is kind of popping back a bit, but I really am glad that you mentioned about people who are a little too shy or terrified to reach out for one-on-ones. Because like, I'm a relatively outgoing person. I'm pretty friendly. I'm very golden retriever-ish, right? But like starting at a new place when you have just like hundreds of people and like, oh yeah, just set up a one-on-one. It's like, that's scary. That is scary. Even that like gets me to a point where like, no, I'm good. I'm
I don't
fine.
need any one-on-one.
I'll just kind of like do one up in the hallway, a little nod, yeah,
wave.
Like, hey.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about that is that I used to schedule everyone's one-on-ones for them. So you saw that calendar. I used to literally do that for people. And because I was worried about that exact thing. And I would say if you are having that question to work with me on my teams, like if you're like, I'm nervous about that, tell your manager, and I will do a soft intro. I don't mind doing that. I'm generally pretty reluctant to schedule meetings for people now because I want you to own establishing relationships. I also don't want those relationships to be colored by me, because me assuming that I have a great relationship also brings my baggage on with me. Right. So me saying, I'm going to set up a one-on-one with you and Lindsay. Luckily, Lindsay and I are really close. We meet once a week. We talk very frequently, but there may be a circumstance in which I'm setting up a one-on-one with someone I just got into a disagreement with or whatever. And so remember that as a hiring manager or as someone helping someone do onboarding, your baggage goes with them. And allow your folks to establish their own relationships outside of your reputation, because it's important. You're an individual and you have your own strengths. So if you're having anxiety, it is totally okay. Just tell your manager. Tell someone who, and it may not be your manager, tell a team member who's willing to give you a soft intro, and try to own it in a way that puts the ownership on you to establish a relationship.
Yeah, that point is so important, Chelsea. Like I'm just thinking about my past few managers. When I was in Chicago, if my manager would have only like created me as a part of like his entourage or his like social group, I never would have started the knitting club. You know what I'm saying? I never would have met like so many different kinds of people that frankly are more suited to me from my strength perspective. I would have thought, oh well, I should only talk to these kinds of people, and for some reason get involved in racquetball and like sport. I mean, it's just simple things like that. Like you may think that that's important because that's one of the first things that you talk about, with your manager, and it's so important to give people the room to say, hey, look, whoever you are, like, here's all these things that are going on. It's up, it's all good. Here's the important things, but establish those things, like, get a feel for it yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that that approach that you highlighted, Chelsea. I think it definitely makes it clear that there are so many different ways to approach supporting somebody, like getting to know their team members. Speaking of getting to know, mentoring, mentorship. We're over 50% of the way through the pillars. Good job, everyone. Glad you made it here with us. So mentorship, I love to talk about after networking because it is just the deeper dive version of networking in the most simplified sense. And what good looks like in the mentorship space is that it's happening regularly, it's peer-to-peer, and my last thing here is close proximity, which I would not recommend currently, but digitally close. Very close digitally is what I would recommend. So when we're in an office together, close proximity is important because that means your new hire can talk to their mentor at any time. But really, what good mentorship is here is that they are meeting with this person a lot more regularly than they might meet with someone in the networking. Like if we're talking about the networking pillar. This mentor is somebody who is potentially doing very similar work to what your new hire is doing, and you want them to learn a skill, or at least how to execute that skill at your company or at your studio. Right. That's a good place for mentorship. If this person is doing something maybe adjacent to what your new hire will be doing in their job, but it's important, maybe they're even in a different discipline, that is also something that that can have a mentorship opportunity with it. And that stuff happening regularly, and the mentor being set up with proper expectations and understanding that they are going to be a key component of the new hire's onboarding. That is all very important as a part of mentorship. For what you can actually do in this space, it can look like a regular one-on-one scenario where that person is just being mentored and having deeper career or job or skill or craft discussions with their mentor. It can also be a shadowing opportunity, which is why close proximity can be very helpful when we're all in the same space. Mentorship can be very effective as a teaching tool as well. So like if you have some documentation on how to set up a tool, but then you have your mentor, you're providing a mentor for your new hire that helps them really deep dive into the tool and how to use it as an expert. That's a good shadowing opportunity. So you can provide mentorship in that way where they're sitting close together. The new hire can pop over to that person's desk, look over their shoulder, and watch them execute maybe a more advanced or complicated task in a tool, or execute a part of their job that might be a little more difficult or very customized and specific for your company. Mentorship can also look like a Q&A with leaders. So this might live in the space that's awkwardly between networking and mentorship, since mentorship should happen regularly and actually be a bit of a deeper dive. But I usually recommend that in the networking or mentorship space, providing a Q&A with a very key leader on your team or in your discipline is a really, really awesome thing to make a part of your onboarding. At Riot, what we do is like 2 to 3 months after a new hire starts, we have a one-on-one setup between them and our director of QA. So it's the person who influences the whole department, the direction that we're going, what is our mission and vision as a QA department. He spends that like a 30-minute time with them when a director level person is quite busy, and he just spends time with them answering their questions. He's basically the setup is what are your questions of the last 2 months? What have you observed in QA? What do you want to talk about? And those discussions can range from anything from like tactical, like how does our department work or where you see our department going, all the way to like what are your opinions on my career direction and what I should be doing there. It gives open forum. Yeah, exactly. It gives new hires a way to have FaceTime with leaders. It allows them to get questions answered at a very, very strategic, high level view, which is something that you rarely get to see as a new hire. And especially, I love to highlight this thing with QA, because in QA we're so often thought of like not at all. Actually, I was going to say thought of last, but it can feel like in QA that you're not really thought of very much at all. And that is and being able to talk to leaders not only in QA, but if you're able to set up time for your new hire to talk to a senior leader on your team, or a senior engineer, or someone who is key to what your product is doing and where your work is going, that's such a great opportunity for them to feel like they get to have a better high level understanding of what's going on, and thus be more invested in what you're doing as a team and as a company. So it's a good opportunity to have a really good impression on this new hire and to give them face time with those leaders, which is really awesome. And this also kind of keys into another thing that I suggest for mentorship, is that it can be outside of the team. If you think somebody should have some deeper level of understanding about something, or get some deeper questions answered, or higher level questions answered, or whatever your version of mentorship is here, if it's someone outside of your team or outside the discipline, that's also an opportunity space to look at as well, much like with the networking that we talked about. So those are the things I like to highlight for mentorship. What are your all thoughts?
I definitely like the loving the at least like some FaceTime with the higher up leadership of the QA discipline. That makes perfect sense. It lets them get this. It lets the leadership get this new person on their radar and be like, okay, cool. Here's where they are. Get a quick understanding of their thought process, and just have a nice chat to make them maybe even seem like not so scary. And be like, oh, this is the director of QA. It's just like, actually, director QA is a pretty cool person.
Yeah,
so this is great. And then it's like having one-on-ones with people that maybe aren't exactly on the team or in the discipline, especially when you get into the more specialized groups of QA, like being able to talk with somebody outside of the team who has like different experiences, or outside the discipline, who can answer some other questions that might give you a little more insight into doing your job a little better. That's an awesome idea.
Love it.
It's super important for people to understand the why, and for them to be presented with that in a way that says, hey, here's where we're going. I need you. I need your thoughts. I need your skills. I need your techniques and your strategies to support this mission. So it's a two-way conversation, and I'll be around. I'll be around if you need to talk about some things. It's so empowering.
Yeah.
So empowering.
Evangelos, apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly, posted, I think it's a fantastic idea to remove barriers between the new person and people who could be in an intimidating position respective to that person, particularly if it's their first gig or a dream job. Yes,
totally agree.
That is our goal. The other thing to say is removing physical barriers and sitting people close to one another is so important. And if you right now it's really hard. If you're being onboarded, if you're going through that process right now, my heart is with you. My heart is also with you daily for this. It's a struggle. It is a really weird world to not be able to be with your team if you're very used to it. If you are used to working from home, we talked about this in episode 1 and 2 sort of, but physically being present with people is so, so important. And make the space for that, even if it's virtual right now, so that you can, really grow a relationship. If you're going to be spending the majority of your waking hours, 5 days a week or whatever your schedule is, make sure that you're facilitating that relationship really well.
Yes, very good highlight for the difficult work from home or social distancing scenario that all of us are in right now. It can be really hard to break down those barriers because we can't. But yeah, I think Chelsea, you make a really good highlight. Like, I think being present for your new hire is more important now than at any other time that you would be onboarding them.
Yeah, on Friday, I pretty much took almost my entire day to sit with folks and to do a workshop. And we just sat there and did a test case workshop. I had other plans for the day, but none of that was important because we just needed to get through logically thinking about some stuff. And did I have a ton of other things to do? Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I cleared my schedule, made it possible for us to sit down and have the conversation, all of us together, so that we could just noodle on some ideas. And so sometimes that's what you need to do. You've got to adapt to whatever the team needs for onboarding a new person. And those strategies have to change depending on the circumstance. And right now, that's what we had to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good highlight as well. Does everyone feel comfortable moving on?
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah, this next one definitely has my attention, and
All right.
I'm in. I'm here. Let's go.
I'm excited about this one.
Okay, so this is another thing that is the most at Riot. It's the most formalized I've experienced this happening, but I've really come to think that this is a very important part of onboarding. And I want to be clear that I think something like initial project and there being 3 giant gears on the slide is very intimidating, but it's not. This can actually, like all of these pillars, this can absolutely scale, whether you're onboarding 2 people or 200 people, or if you have a team that's really big or really small. All of this stuff can be scaled, and that includes this initial project. So what I mean by initial project is actually providing your new hire an opportunity to do something that is reflective of their role and their job, and it adds value to your team. So they get to do something, and that it feels good to do that thing. That's the most basic version of this. So what good looks like here is that you give them a project to do that is obviously representative of their role and their job, but it's also low risk. It adds value to the team. It'll be valuable for everyone on the team for this project to have been completed. Whether that's like it's a really big value or a small value, I think that it's fine for it to exist in that whole spectrum. And your new hire should feel supported while doing this project. So this is definitely, like all the other pillars and onboarding in general, not a drop and walk away thing. It is a thing that you present to your new hire as like, hey, we're onboarding you. You're going to learn some things, and then in your at the end of your first month, we're going to tackle this thing together, where you're going to like lead the effort on this. Yeah. And this is really where expectations are a good pillar to pull in here if you want to like combine pillars together like a pro. What you want to do here is definitely set those expectations, but also give them a good idea of like what good looks like what are some things that they could do to kick off the project? Who should they be working with or talking to? It can be its own micro version of onboarding. But like I said, these can scale to be like really fairly complicated or very simple. So it is hard to come up with very specific examples for this one. But some generalized examples that I usually give hiring managers when I'm advising them on this is like, if it's someone outside of QA, or even in QA, like sometimes QA folks have different opportunities to participate in the development process, but like a batch of low risk bug fixes is a good example of an initial project for someone. Like that's really cool. That's a great way for them to add value, fix some things, and like get something out the door. Participating in a test cycle in a meaningful way, like in a leadership role. And again, it needs to be representative of their job. So that's why it's so hard to come up with like generalized project ideas. But like participating in a leadership role in a test cycle, maybe organizing a small subgroup of your team to test a certain area of your project. That's a really great way to like get someone into practicing their role regularly. If they're in a leadership role, or if they'll be in a role where they need to lead a group of people, having them lead some meetings or take the initiative to facilitate some meetings early on. Those are also examples of like just initial projects. And really, if we ignore everything that I just said about this pillar, and all that you take away is that you just give that person something to do that adds value, where they're not going to, they shouldn't feel bad about failing. Like if they fail, that's totally fine, but they should feel supported at doing this project and maybe failing upward together with the team. And it's just meant to give them a learning experience that is very representative of what they're going to do long term. And it also lets them add that value, because something that I've experienced a lot, I don't know if this is the same outside the game industry. I'm sure it is, but with new hires and me personally, like when I join a new team or I join a new company, I'm like, okay, how do I prove myself immediately? How do I like make sure I'm doing something? And a way to make don't fire me on my first day, please. Something that can ablate that potentially destructive thought process, right? Where if you're just like, I need to add value at any cost, that can sacrifice having an effective onboarding process for like your new hire could experience that for themselves.
Wow.
It could also make them have some work-life balance issues or any other slew of things. If they're solely focused on proving themselves to you, that can be very damaging. So if you give them an outlet for that as well, where you're like, hey, I know, let's just be honest, our documentation's out of date and I know you want to add value. Like, let's have an honest conversation. And part of that conversation is, I know you probably want to like hit the ground running. But the reality is we're just going to do some learning the first 3 weeks. And in your fourth week, we're going to talk about a project that you can work on. And that's definitely going to add value to this team. So I don't want you to worry about proving yourself or anything like that, because it's just, it's something that I think almost everybody experiences. So I think naming that and talking about it early on, and then giving that person not just saying like, hey, your feelings are invalid, you shouldn't want to add value or hit the ground running. I don't want people to go through that, but just to say like, you will get to do that. You're going to add value. You're going to be a great member of this team. We hired you for a reason. Let's talk about what you can do a little bit after we get through some of your onboarding. And this pillar, the initial project, is something I definitely feel really strongly about, because it just creates a very directed experience for someone to feel like they're functional at their job. And I'm sure I could look up a bunch of studies around this. I've seen this at other like onboarding talks at nerdy conferences about onboarding and people. But there is some, I think, supported studies and statistics around things like people like adding value early on and them feeling like that's like they're functional in their job. It's a very real, it's a reality like most of us live in, almost outside of in any industry. So just like having that directed approach to it can really help someone not only feel like they're adding value, but it can open them up to be more present with their early onboarding experience, because they know they're going to add value later, and that you expect them to do that later. Sure. So that's the initial project stuff.
I think like the calendar that you showed earlier shows a culmination on the fourth week, basically, of write a test case and automate it fully. And so I'm a huge fan. This is my initial project. So they're working up to this. So week 2 basically is executing test cases. Week 3 is executing them to get familiar. And then we sit down and have a conversation about, like, along the way, what gap exists and where can I create a test and automate it.
Yeah.
And so for me, this is a super bite-sized chunk, right? It's one test case that I'm expecting, but I'm expecting it to go through the entire process. I'm expecting them to review it with the engineers. I'm expecting them to review it with the product owner. I'm expecting them to sit down and have the conversation. And so for me, the most important thing for my folks on this team is that they get into the process of testing and creating and understanding where the gaps are. For other teams, it may be the conversations, it may be the meetings. And so, Lindsay, I really like that you said it's not one size fits all, because it's not. When you bring in a manager, the things that you're expecting for their onboarding should be vastly different from what you're expecting from an entry-level engineer or analyst.
Absolutely.
And, you have to set those expectations. And I think there are a lot of really good questions that I can't wait to get to at the end. But like, I see these and I think, yes, everything that y'all are thinking, like, it's just important to feel valuable and valued. And coming up with a bite-sized chunk is something that's really important. In fact, Lindsay, in her first months, came and did a bite-sized chunk project with me.
Yes.
And she was super helpful. Like, it was vastly helpful in that role for her to come and help me out. So one thing I would say is it doesn't even necessarily need to be on your team. If another team has something that you can, like, if another leader needs help, ask around. Maybe someone has something bite-sized in your area.
I think that's a really good thought. And I even, to add some more context to my experience there, I went to I did our company onboarding for my first week. And then I think my desk was with my core team for my next week. And then we had like a winter break or something like that. We took a holiday. That's ridiculous. And then when we came back, we moved my desk to Chelsea's team. My desk got moved across the street so that I could sit with Chelsea's team. And that was a really cool first month for me to like have like this bite-sized chunk of how to operate in an actual team at Riot, because my role at Riot was not on a game team and it was not dedicated to a development team. I was creating training and onboarding stuff for QA at Riot. And so like being on that team and being a part of that team for an extended period of time was a really beneficial, initial project for me. That was a really great way for me to understand who some of these people are, how do they operate, and what does good onboarding look like, because Chelsea got to onboard me a bit and she's very good at it. So that was a really good training and onboarding experience for me as well.
Now,
So something. Go ahead, Myron.
Just to be clear, your desk wasn't a skateboard with a laptop, right?
I mean, with enough ingenuity, it could have been, Myron. It
Lindsay
did have
kicked across the street to go sit next to Chelsea.
The team burned real calories making that happen to move your
Oh
desk.
yeah.
And that's also a really important thing when you're new hires. Ask for stuff or need stuff and get stuff, and it's just automatic.
Yeah.
You know what, Myron? That leads us to our next filler. Oh my God! You know what? Anybody who's watching this, I promise you, we didn't plan a lot of these beautiful transitions that are happening.
You're professional. Don't spoil the illusion.
If you want to make a professional presentation for professionals, you want to have people in the audience that will ask the correct questions and lead you to the correct transitions in your slides. I'm not saying you have to pay them, and I didn't pay Myron, but it's someone who's there to support you. Anyway, so I think, Myron, that is legit, though. All jokes aside, a very good highlight for my last pillar, which is 2 pillars: follow up and follow through. So what I like to highlight here is instead of going with the process we've had so far, which is like what good looks like, and here's some specific things, I'm just going to talk about these both separately as like what does it mean to follow up and what does it mean to follow through with your new hire. And this can mean a whole bunch of different things. So if you want to distill it down to just something that is really helpful, it's to actually follow up and follow through with them. And Myron's, I know, right, Chelsea? Myron's example of like, hey, like when your new hire requests something or asks for help or asks for something, actually following through and providing that for them is such a great, like, it's such a huge part of an effective onboarding experience. And this can be anything from moving a desk across a street to like, what does it mean to file a bug, right? Like that is, it can range from so many things, following up and following through. And to just like reference my notes here, following up specifically, it's regular and direct. And I also like to highlight feedback here as well. Feedback can be an important part of just interacting with your new hire, whether you're giving them feedback or they're giving you feedback. And there's a whole other like 1,000-hour discussion we could all have about effective feedback, so I won't get into that. But this is also a space where you want to follow up with them and ask them how they're doing, checking in during onboarding and after onboarding, asking them for feedback on the onboarding process during onboarding is really effective as well, because that allows you to customize their experience. I think in multiples of these pillars so far, everybody has provided some kind of example of like, hey, this is how I approached this thing, or I felt like I needed to do this thing this way versus doing this thing another way. And so every new hire is like shockingly an individual person with different experiences, levels of experience, and different approaches to being a new hire at your company or on your team. And following up with them throughout the onboarding is a great way to understand like, oh, hey, do you need some soft introductions for networking? Do I need to address some concerns in your documentation? Is your initial project that I gave you scaring the crap out of you? Do we need to talk about that? Like checking in with them and thinking back to when you were a new hire and using that as a lever to really understand how they're doing is very important. And then that leads us to following through, because just listening to them and talking to them is powerful. But if there's any sort of action that you can take to make their onboarding better, or to help them learn, or to help them get closer to feeling functional in their job, that's where follow through is a really important component. And especially with the feedback part, like if they say that they're feeling lost, they're feeling isolated, they don't know what they're doing, and those are some huge red flags that as a hiring manager or an onboarding manager, you should take those with you and say, all right, I'm going to follow through on these things. And sometimes that means you take action as the hiring manager, or you answer a question for them. And sometimes it means you admitting that you don't know what to do, or you don't know how to answer a question, and finding the person that does. And by doing that, you are following through really well with your new hire. And you don't have to be the expert at everything. Chelsea mentioned this earlier with documentation when she asked her team for some help. You don't have to be the be all know all of how your team and product operates. That's why you have a team. You're not, if you were making this all by yourself, then you wouldn't need to hire anyone. You wouldn't even have a new hire if you were like the nexus of all of the information. So it's definitely reasonable to conclude that as a hiring manager, your new hire is going to ask you questions and make requests of you that you might not know how to fulfill or produce. And that's where you start asking your team, ask that person's mentor, or have them interact with their mentor if you think it's related to that. Use all of your knowledge and skills that you have and relationships that you already have established within the company to help that person achieve that goal or address an issue. Because that's really what you have that they don't, is like they have a lot of skill and expertise at another company, but what everybody has that a new hire doesn't is just being at the company for a longer period of time. That means you understand the company, you know who to talk to, if you don't know who to talk to, you know who to talk to figure out who to talk to. Like there's just a layer of experience that you have within the subculture of your company that your new hire doesn't, and you need to leverage that when they are struggling, or if they come to you with a question that you don't know the answer to. So that's the 2 pillars for the price of 1: follow up and follow through. Does anyone want to share anything else in that space?
Just a big +1 to being upfront about not knowing the answers to questions. It's okay to be like, I don't know the answer to that, but I know who does, or I at least know where to look, and I will go find that for you.
Yes.
That's an important lesson to learn, and it takes a lot to be able to get to a point where you can say that, instead of just like, oh yeah, I'm going to keep talking and just tell you I know things because I'm the lead. It doesn't, or I'm the hiring manager. It's like, it doesn't take that away from you. It shows like a strength. It shows, oh, okay, I don't know this. And it shows them that it's okay to not know everything also.
Yeah.
And
Safety.
reinforcing that's so important.
Safety. I mean, I think cultivating a culture of safety, trust, like the ability to fail, starts with you as the leader. And what I would say, if you're having trouble with that in your current situation and you are not the leader, then having a very frank discussion about it. And that can be a hard one, right? Like if you don't feel safe in screwing up, I was going to use bad words, but I decided to change that. If you don't feel safe in screwing up, then figure out how you can bring that safety in, what discussions you need to have to create more of that safety, and what tools you have in your toolkit to expand that. But if you're a leader, there is nothing more important than creating trust and safety, and that starts with you.
Totally agree. It's such a good way to set not an expectation necessarily, but to set the stage for your new hire, like that it's safe to not know and ask questions. It'll just make them feel way better about doing that in the future.
And you may not have that on your product, right? I've worked on products where I am a leader inside of a product space and my product is not as safe as my QA team is. And that's okay, because as long as you as the leader are shielding your organization from some of that lack of safety in the product space, that's good. And if you're not a leader in your product space, then form a group of people that you can be safe with. And that doesn't have to be QA people. That can be an engineer, that can be an artist, but find someone that you can have that safe conversation with and say, like, I think I'm fucking up. Well, I didn't edit it out that time, so
we're raw and real here. Underground. QA underground.
Fix it in post.
But I mean, I think find the safety by creating it if you can't. If you're not in charge of it.
Mm-hmm.
Great highlight as well. I love it.
Yeah, and in addition to like letting people know when you forget, especially if you're the leader, also let the new hires and your team in general know when you mess up. Hey, you know what? I forgot that. Let me make it up to you. Let me get X, Y, Z. Let me, you know what I mean? Like sharing that as a leader, you're still a human. And that we're, like Chelsea says, we're human beings making, what is it, human things? Or doing human things?
Yeah, humans doing human things.
Yeah.
Love that.
And we're people. Yeah, sure, I'm the leader, yeah, but I'm someone who's figuring it out also, and I need you. Can you help me do it?
Yep.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
Vulnerability. It's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think a common misconception is that people think admitting to not knowing something or admitting that they messed up, it causes damage. And that's true. Like that, like messing up your onboarding with a new hire, or like if they have a bunch of dust all over their desk when they show up, or a bunch of weird things on their chair or something like that. Like if you mess up, then that is damaging, but it's so much less damaging than not actually addressing it. And that's what the power of admitting that you don't know and admitting that you messed up is. Like if you just let things roll, then it becomes a horror story that we talk about in a podcast like this. Whereas like if someone had gone up to Chelsea and like sitcom style walked into the frame with Chelsea and stared at the desk, and they stared at each other and just said like, you know what, we messed this up. Let's tell the story. That probably would have helped her feel so much better and not completely grossed out, right? But nobody came up and admitted like, yeah, that's kind of gross that your desk is like that. Why don't we like clean it up?
What's worse is, did they know it was gross,
right,
even if they looked at it?
And that is a problem that unfortunately we cannot address in this podcast. It's awareness. But yes, follow up and follow through, very important. Now, you think that we're done with all the pillars, and I know I already gave you 2 for the price of 1, but you get a bonus pillar, everybody. It's called Invest and Care, and I have a really important animation that goes along with this. So, as you can see in a very artistic way, this is covering up the rest of the pillars, because if you take one thing away from like this podcast, if you're watching it later, if you're watching it right now, if you want to ignore everything that we said,
ignore it all.
Literally investing your time and any budget that you have and caring about your new hire is really what we're getting at. That is the most important part of onboarding. All of these pillars are examples of how you can invest and care about your new hire. But the reason that all of this is scalable from a small team to a large team is because you can invest and care in something to help your new hire get through that painful onboarding experience and make it a little bit less painful, help them feel like they're functional at their job, and then they'll be contributing to your company. And then something that we haven't even discussed in this podcast is the statistics and reality around how onboarding actually affects people. I think we may have all heard, or if you haven't, it's a fairly common thing that people don't necessarily leave a company, they leave their manager. And managers are often the people in charge of onboarding their new people. This is a trickle situation where like if the first impression that someone has of your company is a gross desk, or not having a desk, or not being treated like a person, or being forgotten, that is something that absolutely affects the rest of their time at your company. And like in my experience at my first job, when I told you all my example at the beginning, that experience was made up for by my manager investing and caring in me as an employee. He mentored me. He learned how to be a better leader over a relatively short period of time. And even when he didn't know how to onboard me well, he had the proper like instincts as a leader to just roll over and say like, hey, are you okay? Do you have questions? And when I had questions and felt stupid, he reassured me and said like, you know what, that makes sense. I didn't teach you how to do that. Let me teach you how to do it. And he didn't have the onboarding program. He didn't have any documentation that he handed me. I didn't have anything. It arguably could have been the worst onboarding experience I could have ever had, and I could have left the industry and never come back. But because he did this one thing, was investing and caring, I actually loved my job. I leveled up relatively quickly, and now I'm talking to all of you about something I'm super passionate about. So, yay! So, like, if you do take away one thing, really just like giving your time, energy, and any budget that you have to helping this person get off on a good start, they'll stick around at your company. It's so expensive to onboard somebody. It is incredibly expensive, and it's less expensive to like let that person have a good experience up front and then keep them long term. That is where the real value is. So that's my big preachy moment at the end. But that's what's really important, I think, about onboarding, more so than any of the specific things that we talked about in any of the pillars.
I'm super glad that you, but wait, there's more to us in that moment.
I love it. It's my favorite.
We got infomercialed, y'all, and it was good.
Yeah, it was. I was brought up on infomercials, big time investment there. But I also love that it was like I already, but wait, there's more by going like, there's an additional pillar in this last pillar, and then I but wait, there's more.
But that's the best.
Yeah,
you know, whenever they're like, oh, but wait, we didn't just give you 2. We're giving you 3.
Yes.
Only 6 easy payments of $29.99, and you could have
no COD.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was wonderful, Lindsay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for walking us through it. This was
Thank
so
you.
good.
Yeah.
A wonderful, wonderful conversation and a great presentation. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, Lindsay.
Yes, I love being here. I love talking about this stuff. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if that's okay. I would love to see your faces again. Okay, I think closing the window auto unshared the screen, which I'm a big fan of. Okay, awesome.
All right.
Yay, we're back.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So we do have a few questions that were in the Twitch chat. I'll go in the order that I saw them come in. So from Evangelos, the question was, how do all these pillars apply or change based on a user's experience or inexperience in the industry / regarding the role for which they've been hired?
Oh, that's a really hard one to answer. Also, hello, Evangelos. I know exactly who you are, so welcome.
Ooh.
Good to see you. Good to see you. I have worked with Evangelos in the past. That's a really hard question to answer super specifically. Like how is it really? Sorry, Chris. That was a really well-worded question, but is it like around how to customize this for someone's experience? Is that the basics?
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Okay.
It's based on the user's experience or inexperience in the industry, and then also the role they've been hired for.
Gotcha. So this, all of it, this is the most cop-out opening to this answer, but really it is incredibly dependent on that specific job. So like, if you want to talk about a specific role, we could give you specific answers. But for the level of experience, that might be easier to answer at a more broad level. I think the less experienced someone is, the more time and investment you should put into that onboarding experience for them. So if you are able to create really, like if someone was brand new to the industry, like if I got to onboard me in 2012, what I would try to do is have actually update the documentation myself, not necessarily put it on the new hire at that point. I think you could have a supportive experience there that would work for someone who's new to the industry, but it might be good to be a little bit more handholdy with someone who's brand new, and not assuming that they might know how to do something. So even just the simple question of like, and I've experienced this because what I do for Riot is one of the classes I teach is just the intro to Riot QA, where I talk about how Riot QA works, sort of the history of the department. And then I also ask the new hires, I usually ask them like, oh, hey, what's your level of experience? Like I know what title you're going into, but like, have you worked in games before? Did you just get out of college? Where are you coming from? That sort of thing can help you customize on the fly, where you like in that moment when I'm making that presentation, I'm a lot more descriptive about like what shifting left means, or like what these different words mean. Like I have a slide that has some industry verbiage around a development life cycle example. And I sort of break those down just a little bit more for someone if they're really new to the industry. So,
Right.
so if somebody's super new, definitely act like treat this more as an educational experience, especially because if this is in a QA scenario, they don't have academic support from QA usually. They probably don't have a degree in quality assurance. If they're new to the industry and they're out of college, they don't know what good testing looks like. They don't know how to file a bug. And you will need to teach them all of those things. And I'm a good example of someone who literally knew nothing. My only experience with QA when I got my first job was, hey guys, I made a game in school and I tracked all the bugs in this Excel spreadsheet. Look, I color coded how bad they were. That was like the pinnacle of that was what basically I think got me that job. Part of it was because they were like, oh, you made a spreadsheet and you talked about what issues were going on, but I didn't know that was good or bad or whatever, and I needed someone to teach me how to file a bug and what reproduction steps were, because my spreadsheet was just like, what happened? When did it happen? Did it crash the game? Was it really bad or just a little bad? Like, there was no vocabulary around that, and I had to be taught all of that vocabulary and how to put that together in a constructive way. So I know this is a really long-winded answer, but basically on the level of experience side, the less experienced someone is, the more you should turn it into a classroom or even just an educational certification style thing. The more experienced someone is, you should not give up on the onboarding is actually my biggest piece of advice. A lot of people think that because someone is more experienced, if they're coming into a leadership role or a senior role or something like that, then it's really, really easy for someone to be like, oh, this person has 15 years of experience in the game industry. I don't have to onboard them finally. But that's not what you do at all. You actually do have to onboard them a lot. And you may need to teach them about the culture of your company and how things operate differently versus their previous company, because that is so different from place to place. And I've experienced that I'm working with some senior leaders right now who have like talked to me and been vulnerable with me about they're like relatively new. They started maybe 2 weeks before we had to work from home. So they're all thrown for a loop. And they're like, I don't really know. I don't know what this means when we talk about this. And these are senior leaders that are being open and have been given the safety to say I don't know what that means. Or at my previous company, we did this. Does that work here? And we need to answer those questions for them, because the reality is that sometimes it won't. Like, an approach that you took at another company may not work at your current company, and your leaders should know that, and your experienced craft people should know that as well. Yes. So I can't give you super specific, you should approach each of these pillars this specific way for these levels of experience. But definitely onboarding is just as important whether someone is brand new or super experienced. So to take that away, I think, is important.
No, that was good. That's an excellent way to respond. Myron and Chelsea, anything to add?
I think I've added just about everything. I think it was basically perfect, and I think that the conversation that we've had, has added so much. Short answer, no. Nothing else.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Just wanted to see.
I'm there.
All
Lindsay,
right.
you got it.
Thank you.
Way to nail it. Knock that out.
Evangelist said, it makes sense. Thank you. Good. Okay, great. Love that.
I'm going to skip to this one from Mitad. Hopefully I pronounced this correctly. Let's see. How is the process affected with the situation right now, and what are your plans to align the onboarding process in terms of team devices and process? Now, you had touched on this previously when Chelsea, both you, Chelsea and Lindsay, regarding the situation with COVID right now, where everybody's working remotely. How has this affected onboarding? I'm guessing is what the question is.
Do you want me to?
Chelsea, I've talked a lot, so if you want to. Do you want to kick this
Sure.
off? I don't want to totally take over everything.
No, I mean, you're welcome to, but I can give some firsthand experience here. Yeah. So, the current situation has made it so that I have to be a lot more invested mentally in making space for onboarding. I need to follow up a lot more than I did previously. And it's just because I need to make sure that Lindsay has my list of classes that she wants, right? That the classes are okay, that everyone who I could normally walk over to their desk and say hey, have you met up with For example, Patrick, who's my new person. Have you met with Patrick? Have you talked with them? So I'm trying to be a lot more active as a hiring manager. As a new hire, what you should expect is you're going to have to do things like have devices shipped to you. You're going to have to learn through digital means. If you're a visual person, you're going to have to ask a lot more for that. So you need to, as a new person coming into a company, you need to realize what your learning style is and be able to ask for what you need. So do you need to have a whiteboarding session? Are y'all using Google Suite? Can you hop on Jamboard, for instance? If you are a person who thrives off of a lot of contact, make sure that you're setting up meetings. And I think, how all of that stuff is being handled is very unique to each company, but I'll give you an example for us. So I fill out a survey that allows IT to understand what I need for a new person who's starting. They then literally are shipping all of that, including instructions and stuff like that through very different ways. I'm having to talk about VPN now when normally it'd probably be a month in when I'm talking about that. So I've had to restructure some things. It's been different, but as a hiring manager, I'm just making sure I spend a lot more time. It's a lot more mental energy. And, like Myron says, I'm spending a lot more calories on making sure that those connections are being formed. I'm making sure we schedule a lot more game time. I'm making sure that we schedule a lot more downtime for folks. Personally, like I'm find that my fuse is a lot shorter. My burnout fuse is a lot shorter than it was. And imagine being a new person. There's so much stress. If you had to move to an area, which we had someone who did have to move here during a pandemic to one of the largest cities in the US, it's hard. Be very thoughtful of yourself and your company and all of those things.
Yeah. On that point, Chelsea, make sure that you're a whole so that you can be whole for them.
Yes. Please make sure that you ask for time. This is a general statement to anyone who's listening. I woke up yesterday and realized I'm burnout and I need to figure out what I need to do. It's not my boss's job. It's not my peer's job. I need to solve this problem for myself. So just make sure you're being kind to yourself in these circumstances.
That's real. You got to put your mask on first.
Yep, you do.
Yes. Oh my God. Put your mask on first. That was awesome.
I love that. The only thing that I would say about this question is that if you want to take the pillar approach, expectations might be one that you want to lean into really heavily here. A lot of people right now who aren't even new hires are worried about their next performance review or performance cycle because they don't know how this situation will affect that, because a lot of people feel like they're not working at their normal capacity. And some people might be working way more than they should or normally would because that's how they react to stress. And so really understanding how this scenario affects each person or each of your new hires is a great way to start. And then setting expectations with them and saying look, let's have an honest conversation. Our documentation's out of date and we're in a pandemic. This is the reality. And talking to them about what, how they react to stress and what capacity they might be at, and setting your expectations as a manager with them is going to be pretty powerful. And making it clear that these are weird times, so your expectations are going to be adjusted for those is a good place to start. As far as how I've been aligning the general QA onboarding for what I do right now, it's really strange in a good way how well this ports to being remote. We often don't hire a ton of new hires in QA at the same time at Riot. So we haven't had to deal with a huge influx of people immediately to adjust to the new onboarding experience. And the facilitators for the classes that I have for this program are they have become used to being remote by the time we got to the point that we would have a new hire. So when I've interacted with them, I'm also very clear with them because they're not they're not accountable for this person being onboarded correctly. They're a volunteer. So I'm also like, hey, just checking in with you. I hope you're safe. But we have a new hire who's onboarding remotely. Would you be willing to give your class to them on Hangouts? If you don't feel comfortable with that or you don't have the time right now, I totally understand. The new hire has their expectations set that they may or may not get some of these classes. So that has been an important component, as well as like setting expectations for my facilitators in this space has been really good, because I've also told the new hire, like, hey, here's intro to QA. This is how this department operates. Also the whole pandemic thing. Holy crap. So here are the classes I have lined up for you. We'll see if your facilitators can accommodate it or not. You may get it. You may get these classes now. You may get them next week. You may get them in a few weeks. You may not get some of them at all. And I will be clear with you about when that happens. And that sort of makes someone feel a lot better as well, that they're not just like by themselves at their new apartment in LA, not knowing what's going to happen next. So that expectation stuff is very helpful too there.
Excellent. Do we think we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of good questions to get through.
Sure. Yeah. Was there one that really sparked your attention, Chelsea?
There were a few.
Oh.
Let me look up. I think there's one that I really want to touch on very quickly that I think is a straightforward answer. For the initial project by Evangelist, for the initial project, is it more valuable to give them a partner project or something they can really own, albeit with mentorship and oversight? The reason why I think this question is good is because I think you can pick whatever works best for your situation. So if they're going to be partnering a lot with a specific person or a couple of specific people, sometimes a partner project is really good. But you need to make it clear with the people that you already have that the new person is the owner of this and they are supporting the success of that. That it's not just the new person following their partners. And the real key here is giving someone something they feel like they can own and affect change on, and however that works in your system is good. So, that's just something that I would say. Whatever works for you, just make sure that your people who have been established in the role are not smothering the new person, which is very easy to do.
I totally agree with Chelsea's advice here. And the only thing I would add is that one of the things we talked about during that pillar was that the project is representative of what they are going to do long term and their job overall. So if you're having trouble deciding what type of project that should be, whether it should be a partner project or they should be solo or they should work with multiple people or whatever, think about what their job is. Go back to your expectations that you established with Pillar 1. Yes, you did. And create the project from there. Because if something that's incredibly representative of their work is that they're going to lead a group of 3 people, their initial project maybe should involve leading 1 person or 2 people or something to achieve that goal. If they need to understand that something in their job or something that they're going to do in their job involves them flying solo on something or really taking the lead and running with a project on their own, then that project should be representative of that in some way that is a little bit safer, maybe lower risk. So if you're trying to decide how to really approach it because it's totally different from person to person and project to project and job to job, like thinking back to that representative piece, like what would be the most representative part of their work long term, and how do you scale that down to make it bite-sized for them to accomplish in a reasonable amount of time that adds value still and is lower risk and they feel supported.
I think that also leads into Taco Wizard's question, which was how do you approach team or product specific training? And you need to enable that as much as you can. And sometimes that partnership or working with someone who's established on the team is going to be the good thing. In the absence of having someone, like if you're the first person, then you should be speaking with your manager, your product owner, whoever that person is, to say like, hey, who can I sit with to get product specific training? Who can I sit with to get team specific training? And in the absence of really concrete training, Taco Wizard, you're about to walk into this one, like literally when you join us, because Taco Wizard is joining my team that does not have a good onboarding plan.
Taco Wizard, looking forward to you.
Experimentation here. I mean, it's going to be a lot of making allies, just like you said. Asking a lot of questions and figuring out what success is, and we're going to have to take it even slower in some ways, So, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, just take it slow and do as much product specific or team specific stuff as you can. But it's going to be unique to the situation. Make sure that you're not getting smothered. Make sure that you're not, that you're not putting yourself in a bad situation initially. Don't take on too much. Good Lord, you can drown so easily at so many places if you take too much on too early.
Yeah, and I think in addition to this and the follow-on from the previous one is, from an ownership perspective, make sure that you help them understand what ownership means in the culture of your company. I think that's going to be really important for people to help them not maybe drown. There may be environments where people come from where they think that they were expected to like own everything, or they may have just gotten out of one of those horror stories and come in with some PTSD. So help them understand, like, so you own this. Here's what ownership looks like, and just make sure that you are. There's no necessary way or perfect way, I think, to explain ownership to them, but just have that as a dialogue with them, and make sure that you translate the expectations of both yourself, the team, the product, the program level, and the company to them, so that they can be sort of like self-actualized and control their own destiny, and really on a good foundation.
Awesome. All right, friends. Time to reel this in, wrap it up. I'm going to steer us over to our bug of the cast. Now, we did a little poking around on Twitter, and I will copy the tweet thread into the chat. And I was able to ask just on Twitter, like, we're looking for some good bugs. Like, what are some bugs people have experienced? And there were some great submissions so far. Like Renzo did one from God of War with
Renzo. Hey, friend, if you're listening.
Hi, Renzo.
Renzo's great. He did an awesome God of War snapshot. There's some good ones recalling the Red Dead bugs with models doing the wrong animations, like flying people and dogs that were talking as NPCs and riding on people like horses. So that's great. But the one that got my attention, and maybe it's just because I don't play these games, is the Final Fantasy VI bug where Sabin has a suplex attack as like one of his big moves, right? He just grabs him and suplex. It's awesome, right? And most of the enemies were just like a lot of the giant enemies and bosses were immune to these getting suplex this animation because it just looked awful. But they didn't do it to one enemy, which was the Phantom Train. So I'm gonna link a copy. So apparently, first of all, in the Twitter thread, like this was a tweet from Rob the Radish, and thank you for submitting this one. This made me laugh pretty hard. So there's a lot of just fan art that came from this insane idea. But I'm gonna link the YouTube video in the stream chat.
Oh my god!
And it's this awesome 16-bit animation, and they're in the middle of the fight, and this dude just runs up to the train, grabs it, and just suplexes a train. It is incredible. It is incredible. So it's definitely, I would definitely call that a bug of the cast.
Wow, that is a good one. I love some of the fan art too. You wouldn't suplex a train.
I just added the image to the stream so people will see it in a second.
It's so.
Oh, let me move it up.
He did too.
Oh my god!
You see it?
It's wonderful.
All right,
it's amazing.
Right, so I'll move
good pick. Good pick.
It's a good one. It's a good one. So I'm going to call that the bug of the cast. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That's it for today. I want to thank Myron and Chelsea, as always, for joining. And I want to thank Lindsay for bringing her onboarding knowledge and a lovely presentation. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you joining us.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, absolutely. And once again, also thank you to our audience, all of you listening, all of you who joined us on the stream, all of you who are watching on YouTube or any other way that you digest this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any suggestions of future podcasts or for future topics or like bugs of the cast that you'd like us to go over and laugh about, we'd love to hear from you. If you're a QA professional and you would like to be on the podcast, we would also love to hear from you and have you on here so we can discuss about all sorts of QA topics. We have a list of things that we would love to get to. If you would like to do any of these, please contact. I'm doing great. Please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf. That's CONF at the end at gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter, and our Twitter handle is at undergroundqa. Because we'd love to hear from all of you and we'd love to be able to collaborate. Before we go, we can go around to see if anybody has a plug. Myron?
I did this one a while ago, but I'll just do it again. geekygoodies.com. There's this amazing shirt that I love called Fail Faster. If you don't have one, definitely get one, especially in these uncertain times, as they say. You're going to need to get used to failing quickly, getting feedback and connecting with people. And I think that's a really great shirt from a really great team of people that I personally know. But that's it. A rehash, but a relevant one, I would say.
Oh, that's a good one. There's a few stand-ups I should be wearing that at. Chelsea, do you have a plug?
To all the mamas out there, to the wannabe mamas, to the pet mamas, to the baby mamas, to the women who are supporting other people in their lives who aren't mothers themselves. I had so many impactful women in my life, and to my mother, who I miss very much. Happy Mother's Day.
That was beautiful. Well,
That was an awesome
put.
plug.
Thank you.
The best plug on the best day. Should I wait? Can I do a plug or am
Absolutely,
I? What are the
Lindsay,
what are the rules around a plug? Just set some expectations
There
for
are
me,
no
Chris.
rules. It can be whatever it is that you would like everyone else to hear about.
I think all I really want to say is I think there were a lot. I tried to scroll through because I wasn't reading chat because I have one screen because I'm not a professional.
That's okay.
I think I saw a lot of other good questions. So if you want to ask your question and we didn't get to it during the cast today, then feel free to @me on Twitter. I think people usually say don't @ me, and that's like a joke, but you can @ me in this scenario. @ me about onboarding. I'm just Pepper Plays, PEHPPER. PLAYS. Also, just the Underground QA Twitter. I'm sure that I'll be stalking them, and they can forward anything to me. And I'm happy to answer any questions after the podcast.
Excellent, thanks. And per usual, my shout out and my plug is to my team. You're all fantastic. You do a great job, and you make me feel like a competent manager. I appreciate it.
Oh, so many sweet plugs. I was just like, more onboarding, please.
It was perfect. All right. Well, with that, Myron, if you want to cue the music. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Everyone keep playing, keep testing. Please keep washing your hands.
Oh my Lord, yes, please.